Bet the board.
What do you mean you don't bet? I mean, I don't bet. You know, I don't gamble. I don't. I never have, and I never will. Yeah, right. I'll bet you $20 I can get you gambling before the end of the day.
You owe me 15 grand, pal.
Pay him. Pay that man his money.
It's the Bet the Board podcast.
God likes me. He really, really likes me.
In the end, I wound up right back where I started. I could still pick winners, and I could still make money for all kinds of people back home. And why mess up a good thing?
Here's Payne Insider and Todd Furman.
Welcome into the Bet the Board podcast. NFL Week 4, and things start to get interesting in the final weekend of September. I'm your host, Todd Furman, joined as always by my esteemed colleague and co-host, the one, the only Payne Insider. And Payne, Monday Night Football, an absolute snooze fest for the better part of 2.5 quarters. Things got mildly interesting late in the game, and Cooper Rush, the legend, lives on.
What's so interesting about end of September football?
The fact that we get to the quarter point, we have a better indication of who a lot of these teams are, and you're starting to figure out the landscape, whereas it's not nearly as much guesswork in terms of which teams are going to be good, which teams have those outliers, and you get a more clear grasp of who these NFL teams are from top to bottom.
I gotcha. Very interesting season to start with totals and games going under and median numbers being substantially lower than they've been in the past. And a lot of people are talking about that, but they're not quite figuring out why it's transpiring. So it has been a very wild start to the season, I think, in that regard, because there's just a ton of things that are transpiring that we just haven't seen over the handful of the last few seasons. In terms of Monday Night Football, good on Daniel Jones for surviving that, because my God, did he take a beating.
Evan Neal, by the way, might get him killed.
There's not a lot of positive for that offensive line. They just can't seem to get it figured out. And you have 2 first-round picks at the tackle positions. And Thomas has played admirably to start this season. He's really turned into a good lineman. And then you were hoping that you would fill out the interior with a bunch of savvy veterans with Feliciano and Glowinski. And he is getting pressured at a rate that is unsurvivable. Saquon Barkley was special again. Hopefully you guys cashed in on those receiving props. The runs up the middle seemed to be quite efficient, and I thought for a second there the Giants might beat the steam. But Cooper Rush ultimately turned things on. CeeDee Lamb started catching balls late, and it was the Cowboys offense that had some crucial drives there to win that game. Ultimately would that fall 39?
Falls right 39. So right in that dead zone between 38.5 where it closed and the opportunity to go under 40 if you were the early bird there.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting there. But nothing too shocking, right? I mean, if you got a good number on the under, that was the professional position. If you got a good number on the Cowboys, didn't matter. That ended up was the professional position, and pretty much what we saw unfold was what we discussed in that Monday podcast. Would the Giants be able to survive pressure? They weren't really able to. Saquon Barkley showed pretty well. Other than that, pretty straightforward.
So the Giants go from potentially being the worst team in the NFL to be 3-0 to now being the worst team in the NFL with a 2-1 record, although they'll take on the Chicago Bears, which will have a lot to say about that. Spoiler alert for all of you, our loyal listeners, that will not be one of the games that we provide a deep dive on today.
Oh, come on, Todd. You suck.
Hey,
New York and Chicago, big markets. You're TV guy. Yeah, that had to have made the cut.
You know what? Honestly, it did have me thinking, because it is 2 of the more fervent fan bases, and there is a ton of optimism, albeit properly misplaced, with 2-1 starts for those 2 teams. And barring a tie, one of those teams will go to 3-1. Fortunately for them, they play in the NFC. That might be enough to give them a leg up on some of the competition in their competition for a wild card. But let's go to Thursday night.
I was being very kind and didn't want you to hurt yourself.
Over which particular aspect of things?
You started your last sentence with, I was thinking about this, but
yeah, well, there's no reason to be kind around here. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. This is a safe space. It's built for pot shots as much as anything else. And the day you start opting to be nice instead of taking shots and they properly avail themselves, I'll be a little disappointed.
Whoa. All right, Thursday Night Football. Let's get this party started. Right. I know you got places to be.
I mean, who doesn't have places to be? When you have a chance to talk Dolphins, Bengals, I mean, you have to jump at the opportunity. And we're looking at the Cincinnati Bengals, a 3.5-point favorite across the board, number down from 4, but up from where we originally said that we shared a position on Monday's podcast. The total has kind of ping-ponged all over the place, but we'll call 48 the consensus right now where it's settling in. And this becomes the first head-to-head meeting between Joe Burrow and Tua Tagovailoa since number 1 LSU beat number 2 Alabama 46-41, Payne, back in November of 2019. The amazing part, when you look at the Dolphins, they now have shorter odds than the Cincinnati Bengals to win the Super Bowl at a lot of prominent books. Meanwhile, Jaylen Waddle, he has the most yards of any receiver coming from that 2021 draft class, or most receptions, excuse me. Jamar Chase, the most yards. So you have a ton of firepower on display. And quietly, the Miami Dolphins, over their last 12 games, 11-1 straight up, best in the NFL, 10-2 against the spread, tied for best in the NFL, and that's on the heels of starting last year 1-7 straight up and against the spread. Meanwhile, the Cincinnati Bengals, no stranger to games going under the total. I don't know if this warrants a deep dive, given some of the stuff that we uncovered that we shared a little bit on Monday night, but as far as this football game here, what are some of the marquee matchups you're looking for that'll ultimately determine who gets you to the window?
I think this game became a lot more interesting because of Twitter. And I'm not on there frequently, as our college football listeners know yesterday. But I log on there, send out a tweet about the college football podcast, and all I see is some variation of everyone's on the Bengals, haven't heard anyone say they like Miami. How many times can we hear about the Dolphins defense playing 90 snaps in 100-degree weather on a short week? Social media is not real life. And I think gambling Twitter comprises like 0.02% of the betting market. So I think you have to be able to kind of separate the good information from the bad and understand that very few people in the content space create their own thoughts or actually bet real money. It should be understood that the conversation changes when we go from Cincinnati -1 out to 4.5 and now down to 3.5. But I don't think this game is just about, the fatigue the Dolphins defense has on a short week traveling 1,200 miles, right? There is a 53-game sample of defenses playing 90-plus snaps. The drop-off isn't massive, but it's certainly not nothing. There were 2 games in that sample that included a short week. 0 games in that sample included 102-degree weather and a short week. So it is obviously tough to quantify, but it's an element that, merits some factoring. But really, I think what this movement is about is that certainly Tua was upgraded, but he's dinged. He's going to play. That's all the indication. That's why we're back to 3.5, but he's dealing with a back issue. He's dealing with an ankle issue. Jaylen Waddle's battling a groin injury, even though it looks like he's going to play. Teron Armstead and Xavier Howard are playing through injuries. The Dolphins were forced to change their travel schedule due to Hurricane Ian, and they fortunately were able to get a walkthrough Wednesday at Nippert Stadium, home of the Cincinnati Bearcats. But kids do what kids do, and they filmed the walkthrough, put it on the internet, sent the walkthrough film to the Bengals. Let's see how that unfolds, okay? But, getting into the actual matchup, right, for as bad as the Bengals offense has been, and it's been putrid, right? It's really bad. 31st in schedule adjusted efficiency. The 2 areas where Cincinnati's offense has been good is the scheme Miami employs defensively. Miami likes to blitz, second highest blitz rate in the NFL at about 40%. Joe Burrow, 5th best EPA per pass attempt when blitzed. The reason Cincinnati's offense is bogged down is because defenses are giving them the Chiefs treatment with the 2 high shell looks. Miami's played 2 high shell at the 3rd lowest rate in the NFL through 3 games. It's very much an aggressive man defense. And when the Bengals pass against non-2 high shell looks, they're 5th in EPA per pass. Have not had a problem against man because you have receivers that can beat that type of coverage, and Joe Burrow has no problem pushing it down the field. Then you have the tiny other elements that kind of all add up, right? Short week home team does quite well. First-time head coaches don't do overly well their first short week Thursday night game. Just the urgency of not allowing a team in your own conference to get out and hide at 4-0 as you dip to 1-3. There's also some added motivation here, right? Both Zach Taylor and Lou Anarumo were fired by the Miami Dolphins and owner Stephen Ross. Now, similar to last Thursday, big real position on the favorite early below the key. Eventually, the market reaches a point where the number gets too egregious. and value bettors come in and hit the dog. So it's not surprising to see buyback at 4.5 and 4 as Tua hits the screen being upgraded. But know this, I think the most influential pro bettors that made this game pick or something close to it were also the ones that ran to lay 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5, and even some 3, even though their numbers didn't indicate it, you know? The interesting part about the total, too, is we kind of just, Todd, get your thoughts here at the end. I know we want to go a little bit quicker here. But
no, it's your Dolphins. I give you the floor, and you have carte blanche to cover whatever angles you want.
Things that we sometimes say in passing get picked up in use. So I'm a little hesitant on Mondays to say some things, but I did indicate our model didn't get us to 48.5. We were showing 46, but we didn't take a position on the under, although another group did. And that's because the matchup I laid out, right? Because Burrow and the Bengals offense should have success here. It's the Bengals defense that's also stepping up in class, that's playing a far more capable offense than Mitchell Trubisky in his first start of the season, or Cooper Rush with dinged up parts around him, or Joe Flacco well out of his prime. And if Cincinnati's scoring offensively, it's going to push Mike McDaniel, who's very much played to the scoreboard rather than unleashing the Dolphins offense early from the onset, right? You're probably going to get him pushing a bit more here if Cincinnati's having that success. And that's ultimately why we didn't go under, even though we showed value to the under through a key like 47.
Well, I think your point about game state is 100% accurate. Obviously, when you look at Miami, game 1 against New England, they had a lead. They didn't do anything to come out of their comfort zone. Game ends 20-7. They had to erase a deficit week 2 against the Baltimore Ravens, so you saw that game go flying over the total. And then last week against Buffalo, both teams were relatively methodical when the game was 14-14. No one found themselves in a hole where they had to abandon their game plan. The game ultimately comes in well under the total despite 28 first half points. And I do want to kind of put a button on this game with your echo chamber comments about gambling Twitter. So I poke around, I talk to a number of books, I try and get an idea of exactly how some of these games are being bet. So I like to talk to sportsbooks that cater to sharper customers, like to look at some of the reports that get sent my way from books that deal with more recreational customers. And there are a number of assets out there that indicate free contests. I think that is a significantly more reflection of how games are being bet. So for all of gambling Twitter that says everybody and their brother is on the Bengals, I've looked at 2 of my metrics, Payne. They both indicate that 55 to 60% of contest picks coming in on the dog, undefeated in this spot against a beleaguered Cincinnati side at 1-2. So your point is completely spot on in terms of when you put yourself in a space where you're hearing the similar opinions bouncing back at you, it doesn't give you a truly accurate reflection of what the landscape is actually doing.
You put that much more eloquently than me, and you are a corporate guy, so substantially more PC as well. And we're not we don't create content and we don't have the listenership we have because we talk about bet percentages and all of that stuff. But when you start seeing that on Twitter, you're like, is this really what's happening here? Let me actually look at this for the first time in history. And I didn't get that vibe either. So you're spot on with kind of, you log on to Twitter, you follow who you follow, and you believe that that's kind of the entire depiction of the market, and it's just not the case.
Agreed. And for the one game that goes that way and people go, oh, look, see, I told you that was the case. I mean, if you're going to use confirmation bias once a game goes final, you are never going to be a long-term winner in this space. Rant over there, but I do think there are some valuable components that should factor into your handicapping. Always start with your baseline numbers, X's and O's, and then figure out what you want to use to ultimately arrive at an investment opportunity. We do have our first breakfast football game of the entire season, Payne, from lovely London, and it's the New Orleans Saints in a de facto home game taking on the Minnesota Vikings. Been fascinating to watch this number kind of ping pong in and around the key number of 3. Minnesota right now a 2.5 point favorite. Total on the game sits at 43.5. And before we were poised to jump on to record this morning, some interesting injury news coming out of Saints camp. Jameis Winston wasn't available for the media portion of things. Michael Thomas dealing with a toe injury, not sure he's going to go. And when you look at some of the dynamics in play for this, the New Orleans Saints got to London. They went through a full practice on Wednesday there. Minnesota not the same way. But when you try and handicap this game, knowing that there is a potential of Jameis Winston being sidelined, is it addition by subtraction? Because the Jameis we've seen through the first couple of games dealing with 4 broken vertebrae hasn't looked like the same quarterback we saw last year before he tore up his knee.
certainly Saints offense against this Vikings defense is a lot about the injury report. Is it Jameis? Is it Dalton? How healthy are Thomas and Landry? And it's those injuries coupled with, again, no Sean Payton just pulling the strings, and the offense has just been really anemic. 1 touchdown on 25 drives over the first 3 quarters to start the season. It's the lowest rate in the league by a mile. Nearly 75% of the Saints' offensive output has been in the fourth quarter playing catch-up. Now, Minnesota's defense hadn't been very good. It looks like it's getting Harrison Smith back this week as he passes the concussion protocol, but keep an eye on Zadarius Smith on the edge. Let's see if he gets out there and goes. Minnesota hasn't been able to stop the run, and that's something the Saints do like to employ, right? Minnesota's 31st in schedule adjusted rush efficiency. That's easily been the best part of the Saints offense, and it's nothing to write home to mom about, but it has produced better than average results. So I would think, Kamara and company are going to be able to run the ball a little bit. Maybe you're doing something a little more dynamic with Taysom Hill, who should be out there this week. The Saints are also stepping down in class. Right, New Orleans has played a top 10 schedule of defenses. Now you get number 26 Minnesota, a team that can't get pressure either, 29th in pressure rate. So whether it's a banged up Jameis or it's Andy Dalton getting thrown into the fire, it doesn't look like either of those quarterbacks are going to be playing with pressure on them, especially if Zadarius Smith ends up not going here. But I think a lot of times these matchups are about scheme. And if it is Jameis Winston, it's a guy who likes to push the ball downfield. He's aggressive. He leads the league in intended air yards at more than 11. You look at what Minnesota does defensively with Ed Donatel. He plays zone. Very much a keep everything in front defense, and I think that's important to have Michael Thomas out there, Jarvis Landry out there, and both of them healthy while they're out there, because you need veteran receivers to be able to find the holes in these zones and sit down and not keep running themselves into coverage. And maybe this is a spot where Andy Dalton is a little bit better here, because you look at Winston, all 5 of his interceptions this season are against zone, and the Vikings are playing some variant of zone on 85% of snaps through 3 weeks. But as we started recording this, you hit it perfectly. News broke that Jameis did not practice on Thursday. Michael Thomas did not practice on Thursday. So if it's Dalton with no Michael Thomas, certainly things change a little bit, and this is a game where you just have to keep glued to the injury report.
And not practicing is one thing, but if you look at it, and you've done this as long as we have, there are other things that you want to try and factor into the equation. One, Keith Kirkwood upgraded from the practice squad, a receiver. This leads you to believe Michael Thomas, probably a long shot to go. I know it could potentially be for Jarvis Landry as well. And also during Wednesday's practice, it wasn't just Andy Dalton taking first-team reps. They had Taysom Hill out there taking reps as a quarterback as well, something the Saints told us was not going to happen this year when he was designated as a tight end. So take that for what it is when you try and handicap the game, and to Payne's point, you're going to want to monitor the injury report. Now, on the other side of the ball, when you look at the Minnesota Vikings, Kirk Cousins led them back from the depths last week, erasing a 10-point deficit, a situation where he hasn't exactly been great at any point in his career. I mean, the game-winning passing touchdown to KJ Osborne, 45 seconds left. Entering that game, you'd had more than a 40-game sample size. Kirk Cousins had won just 2 of those in the past. Dalvin Cook, a season high in rushing yards. He's dealing with a shoulder injury, and in the past, we haven't seen him be very effective. I would be stunned if he's out there actually playing. I think it'll be an Alexander Madison type game. And Cousins has had some success against the Saints. The thing for this Vikings offensive line, they've been good in spurts, but more importantly, Payne, the New Orleans Saints, for whatever reason right now, aren't generating a lick of pressure, so you would think Cousins will have time to operate from a clean pocket.
You hit this perfectly in that the Saints defense is playing well, but there's things that continue to be a little bit of a mystery, right? Some weeks it looks like a dominant force. Other weeks it leaves you scratching your head. There's some sectors of the defense that are elite, and others have me asking, how is this possible? The Saints defense started slow against the Falcons, and obviously it was a new look offense. Game 1, didn't quite know what to expect with Marcus Mariota under center, and Drake London being a featured weapon. The last 2 weeks, it's been Tampa and Carolina. One offense that's decimated by injury, the other decimated by ineptitude. Tampa scored 13 of their 20 points on offense, but it only required 108 total yards on those scores. 0 play drive that led to 3 points, 28 yards on 9 plays that led to 3. The Saints defense only surrendered 7 points all game that didn't start in plus territory. So you like seeing that. And then again last week against Carolina, similar situation. Saints gave up 13 points in the first half. Just 6 of them were on defense, and the drives went a grand total of 92 yards on those scoring drives, right? In the second half, the Saints gave up 9 points, 3 of them on a 19-yard drive over 7 plays. And then the Saints, because they play aggressive, got out of position a little bit and got hit with a 67-yard explosive by Laviska Shenault.
Yeah, how about that Shenault sighting, by the way? I hadn't heard that name in an eternity.
He was supposed to be the guy in Jacksonville, but he had some burst, and he plays more like a running back, so it makes sense, right? Get the ball in his hands quickly and let him just be a force with it in his hand, as opposed to seeing if he's this proficient route runner, which he's really not. But you look at the last 2 weeks, the Saints have only allowed 31% of plays to great successful. It's the best mark in the league over that stretch, 5th in EPA per play. Here's the weird part, and you hit this perfectly. They're not getting any pressure. Dead last in the NFL the first 3 quarters in pressure. Just a 13% pressure rate all quarters, second worst. And Kirk Cousins' splits are massive with and without pressure. The other thing here is the Vikings O-line has quietly been playing pretty good, right? Like relatively well, much improved over their recent standards, and I understand it's a 3-game sample, but it doesn't come off as shocking because Brian O'Neill is damn good at right tackle. He continues to play very efficiently. And then you had 2 young guys in Christian Darrisaw and Ezra Cleveland. They're kind of growing up in front of our eyes. And then Garrett Bradbury, who was a top pick but has not played to that level, he's improved a little bit in this new system. And so that's pretty interesting to watch, right? All told, Minnesota's 3rd in pass block win rate. So you're in this situation where it wouldn't appear, at least with the data we have, that Cousins is going to be under much duress. Always tough, I think, to kind of gauge offensive game plans. Kevin O'Connell, we thought would just, lead this pass-happy attack, but he made this comment after the Eagles loss about falling into a bad habit of trying to catch up on one drive the way he was calling plays. And what we saw last week was this concerted effort to get the ground game going, and obviously Dalvin Cook in that situation not getting the ball enough. So they ran the ball a decent amount early on in that game until they had to play catch up. But right now, Minnesota has the 3rd most efficient rush attack. I don't think you can run on the Saints. And the last 2 games against traditional run-style offenses, New Orleans allowed a negative 0.38 EPA per rush, second best. So I'm looking at this and saying probably a dead shot under if Minnesota comes out and tries running the ball again this week. I think the far smarter thing would be to open this up, understand that New Orleans isn't quite getting pressure, understand that your offensive line's protecting much better, understand that the Saints defense is very much aggressive and you might be able to hit some explosives. And I get that Kirk Cousins hasn't been great early on this season against man coverage, and that's typically what the Saints play. But I just don't think you should be running your head into a brick wall. And as you mentioned, Dalvin Cook, highly questionable, likely out, right? And then, I look at Cousins' efficiency on 3rd down. He's the lowest rated passer on 3rd down among qualifying quarterbacks. So the idea that you might want to run inefficiently on early downs and then hope that Kirk can bail you out on 3rd probably isn't the right approach here in my mind.
Sure, there are plenty of fantasy managers out there that were patting themselves on the back for Justin Jefferson having a massive game against the Green Bay Packers. He's obviously come crashing back to earth a bit over his last 2 performances. Had 23 targets the first 2 weeks, just 6 against Detroit, and a grand total of 14 yards versus the Lions. But if you're a Vikings fan, I think the silver lining in that performance has to be you were still able to erase a double-digit deficit and get some of your secondary options, Adam Thielen and KJ Osborne, involved in the offensive game plan, something that should be a harbinger of success and a sign of things to come going forward. From London, Payne, we head back to the East Coast in a game I think that would have been the most fascinating and still probably is, but Mother Nature may have her say in who ultimately emerges victorious in Baltimore, where the Ravens will welcome in the Buffalo Bills. And it's the Bills, a field goal favorite in this game. Total has come down from the open, a peak of 55 at a prominent offshore, now down to 51. And when you look at the Ravens, they've lost 4 straight home games, tied for the longest streak in franchise history. Should come with the caveat that Lamar Jackson has only started 1 of those 4 games. These are 2 of the top 3 scoring teams in the league, set to do battle potentially in sloppy conditions. Top 2 quarterbacks in terms of touchdown passes so far this season. And I mean, the superlatives we can continue to heap on Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson for how well they're playing will keep us here for hours, but I will offer up a couple of interesting trends. We've talked about Josh Allen. He's been dynamic on the road, 20-9 against the spread, was saddled with a loss last weekend against the Dolphins. And when you're trying to figure out exactly what the Bills are doing, I mean, this is a team that has covered numbers and done so with reckless abandon over the last season plus, but Lamar Jackson into slightly uncharted territory as a home underdog for just the third time in his career. I lay all of that out to ask, honestly, will any of that matter if Buffalo is down 37 players like the injury report suggested on Wednesday and Thursday?
Well, it's just another game that you just have to really keep your eyes peeled to that injury report, see who plays, who doesn't. But we've had some back and forth with this game. The look ahead, I believe, was 4. We reopened 3.5. Some early Baltimore money came in, and then it looked like some guys were practicing for Buffalo, and that went from 3 back to 3.5. And then yesterday's injury report didn't look great, so now we're back at 3. That's really been the synopsis of the market in this game. Go ahead.
Kid you not. I read an article from Buffalo, and I think they listed 35 players, or what felt like it, in some capacity that were either out, questionable, limited. We talk about clean injury reports, and one of the best attributes an NFL player can have is availability. May not be the case for Buffalo, but sorry, I digress. I just kind of wanted to lay out what the situation was.
And it's led to an employment for a very well-respected Florida State cornerback. I'm looking at this game, and when I'm looking at Buffalo's offense, right, we've kind of talked about this potential for negative changes to their offense without Brian Daboll. And I think we assumed the pass rate would decline. We were wrong. That has not changed at all. In fact, the pass rates have increased. Buffalo's still first in pass rate over expectation through 3 weeks. The problem has been the way Buffalo's passing. Josh Allen has the 6th lowest intended air yards per pass out of 33 qualifying quarterbacks. And with that, right, the explosiveness of the Bills' offense is pretty much dwindled, right? They're 19th in explosive play rate. And I get Ken Dorsey, right? I don't know. Maybe he's jealous of the guy's arm. He didn't really have a hose. I just don't understand what they're doing. It doesn't make any sense to me offensively. And because of these short passes and the lack of explosiveness, something I think we identified watching the Rams game, the Bills' early down offense hasn't been great. 23rd. In first down schedule adjusted efficiency, 12th on second down. The Bills are really surviving right now because of everything that Josh Allen is doing. He's playing out of his mind, and it's allowed the Bills to be second in late down efficiency, where Allen is just thriving on third downs. And get this number right now, Allen's helped the Bills offense pick up a first down or score a touchdown on 66% of third downs. The league average is 34%.
Not sustainable.
No, this is going to regress, and if it does, the Bills' offense likely sees a little bit more regression than I think even what people are anticipating. The offensive line, to your point, is beat up a little bit. You had starting center Mitch Morse miss last week with an elbow injury. He's been limited through this portion of the week in practice. You had starting right guard Ryan Bates in the concussion protocol. Left tackle Deion Dawkins is ill. Spencer Brown dealt with heat exhaustion last week. Roger Saffold's 34 and he requires rest days. I think most of these guys play this week, but every single lineman is dealing with something at this point and not nearly 100%. But you go back to the matchup as well. And the Bills throwing short more often, as we indicated, right, compared to the Daboll years. Josh Allen's only thrown 12% of passes 15-plus yards this season. It's the 4th highest rate of passes less than 15 yards. And the Ravens' defense hasn't been perfect. Guys are a little bit banged up. They're starting to get healthier, especially in the secondary. But the Ravens' defense right now, 8th in short pass efficiency defense. And again, you're getting Marlon Humphrey and you're getting Marcus Peters working their way back from injuries this past offseason. And I think they're playing pretty well. And I think they improve this defense as we start to go along and those two guys get a little bit healthier.
If Bills fans are looking for a silver lining for overall defensive health, they're probably not going to find that either. And matched up against Lamar Jackson and how explosive he has been through the first 3 games has been pretty eye-opening. Just when you think Lamar may be poised to take a step back or a little bit more reluctant to run, the Ravens lead the NFL in yards per play this season at nearly 7. They're third in yards per rush and yards per pass. The Bills' defense has exceeded some expectations. The metrics are good there, and no quarterback has been blitzed more than Lamar Jackson this season at 41% of his dropbacks. The caveat to that is that no team has blitzed less, easy for me to say, than the Bills, 7% of opponents' dropbacks. And Payne, we talk all the time. The key to slowing down Lamar Jackson is having athletic safeties. You talk about Javon Holland when they play the Dolphins. We know what Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer can do. Well, Hyde is lost for the season. Jordan Poyer is dealing with injuries. If Buffalo is banged up in their defensive backfield, can they possibly devise a game plan not only to slow down Lamar as a runner, but Lamar as a passer, specifically as often, as infrequently, as effectively as he utilizes Mark Andrews in the middle of the field?
The way Lamar is playing right now, if the season were to end, he's clearly the MVP, and you're starting to wonder if there's things defenses can do to even hinder his ability to not be this efficient. I mean, he just seems like no matter what you throw at him right now, he's been fantastic, and it's just like, I know we kind of busted balls because he put on a few pounds, and the understanding was he did that to survive more hits this season and stay healthy. So, I mean, the way he's playing, just inject all the popcorn and milkshakes into his veins because he is just, it's unbelievable.
You may need to change your eating regimen.
When you watch the film and then you look at the data, you're like, this is just unbelievable. But the one thing I would say is, based upon what he's seen so far and what the Bills do defensively, Lamar Jackson's going to get a different look this week. The first 3 weeks against the Jets, Dolphins, and Patriots, that trio of defenses either play man coverage or blitzed at ridiculous rates, or did both. That's just kind of how they devised their game plans, right? Dolphins sent heat on 55% of Lamar's dropbacks. Patriots, 38%. Jets lived in man coverage. Buffalo doesn't play anything like that, and you hit this perfectly, right? Like, the Bills' defense has played the second highest rate of too high shell. The Bills are also number 1 in pressure rate on early downs the first 3 quarters while blitzing the very least. Buffalo doesn't have to blitz to get pressure. So none of what they do defensively is what Lamar Jackson's faced the first 3 weeks. So will be interesting to see how he handles that. Now, Lamar's third in EPA per dropback against non-too high shell looks, 19th when he plays too high shell. So that is what Buffalo does defensively, but it might not be at the level, as you indicated, if Poyer is down in addition to Micah Hyde, who's out for the season. Poyer's dealing with a foot injury, was limited at practice on Wednesday. Let's see how that progresses. I just look at this, right? And that's, I think, the thought process of, can you employ that style to the level that you need against Lamar with all of these injuries, right? And it's Tre'Davious White still in the PUP. Micah Hyde, as we mentioned, out. And then the new guy, right? Christian Benford broke his hand in the Dolphins game. He's out. Dane Jackson, highly questionable again. Monitor the Poyer thing because he's kind of that defensive team leader now. He's been limited. You also have Jordan Phillips, who's out again. Ed Oliver was limited. So the injuries have to be factored here. But schematically, a much different look Lamar Jackson will see this week with Buffalo's defense that doesn't blitz and plays more, too high shell. The other thing you start digging into a little bit here is the Bills' offense is obviously more methodical with these short passes. The Ravens defend short passes well. The Bills don't blitz. The Bills play too high. Defenses that don't leave you susceptible as often to the explosive, which, the Ravens have lived on a little bit offensively as well. And then you factor in, as we speak, right, it looks like a 50% chance of rain, 16-mile-per-hour winds, and you see why this total has gone from 55 to 51. I will say this, keep an eye on this total, because even with the matchup stuff, even with some of the things that we've mentioned, if the weather clears out, I could see an appetite here at the key of 51 to go over. But again, the matchup isn't great here. And the way Buffalo's offense is playing is very methodical. And then you tack on the weather, and that's ultimately why we've seen this total just come crashing down.
Can I ask a question of you here? If both of these teams came into this game with optimal health, we'd be looking at Buffalo, a 3.5, 4-point favorite potentially here?
Buffalo minus like 3.8. Yeah.
Okay. So you're talking about the rash of injuries and some of the question marks we have. And granted, Baltimore isn't exactly the model of health. They're dealing with some offensive line concerns themselves, but cluster injuries at a number of positions, and the market is essentially, now it is the primary key number out there, come down a point. Just something to factor in, not advocating necessarily for a play on Baltimore, but as you get closer to kickoff, all things that you want to factor into your decision-making process. Encourage all of you, our loyal listeners, to follow Payne on Twitter, at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Furman. You, of course, can follow me there as well. Most importantly, as always, follow the Bet the Board podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And if you haven't already done so, I'm not sure what you're waiting for, be sure to go to the website, sign up for the newsletter, all sorts of great additional content there. If you happen to miss a podcast, you happen to miss an article, and prop bets as well. Last week's prop bet got you to the window. Clyde Edwards-Helaire under 46.5. Last I checked, Payne, Clyde Edwards-Helaire didn't finish with a single rushing yard. It's about as easy as it gets.
Yeah. That was an easy one. That's how we like them.
So that's what we prefer to do around these parts. And something I didn't think we would say before the season started, when we get into deep dives and extensive breakdowns of games, I didn't think it would include the Jacksonville Jaguars this early in the season. But here we are, 3 games in. They're atop the AFC South, and the Jaguars are involved in one of the feature games of the day for a trip to the city of brotherly love in Philadelphia. The Eagles, 6.5-point home favorites, total in the game 46. We have seen money coming on the dog and money under the total as well. Homecoming, obviously, for former Super Bowl champion head coach Doug Peterson, who has already won as many games as a Jaguars head coach as his predecessor in Urban Meyer. The Eagles are seeking their 6th 4-0 start in franchise history. It would mark the first time they've done so since 2004. Impressively enough, the Eagles have scored 0 points in the fourth quarter so far this season. The combined record of the other teams that have that dubious distinction, 2-6-1. Meanwhile, the Jaguars, they're seeking their first 3-game win streak since 2007. Their win last Sunday at the Chargers snapped an 18-game road losing streak that dated back to 2019. That last road win came against the Raiders, who were then the Oakland Raiders. First time they've now won back-to-back games by 20 points since 2000. I think Payne was in 7th grade back then. And the first team since 2014 Patriots to win back-to-back games by 20-plus points as an underdog. Kudos to the Jaguars for exceeding market expectations. Where the hell was this effort week 1 against the Commanders? But I digress. When you're looking at this matchup, Payne, which side of the ball are you more fascinated to see unfold?
Well, they're both fun because this is the only matchup of the week that features 2 offenses that are top 4 in EPA per play on early downs the first 3 quarters. Unfortunately, it looks like weather is coming into the mix. The same one that is, same little weather system that is hitting the Buffalo Ravens game is also going to impact this one.
2 best games of the early session, we're going to have weather play a role. I can't get weather in Giants Bears that nobody gives a shit about. I got to get weather in 2 football games that people want to watch.
Yeah, that's what it appears like. So keep your eye on that weather report, and it's causing this game to have a little bit of influx. So we saw a very sharp position early in the week go over 46.5, got as high as 48.5, and then the weather comes rolling in, and this morning we're down to 46. So that is certainly weather predicated. Although, the Eagles have taken some under money from one specific group. But I will say what's interesting is all of the dynamics you mentioned, right? Super Bowl winning Dougie P returns to Philadelphia. I'm interested to see what he has up his sleeve, right? I think
he's got to run the Philly special. He's got to run the Philly special.
We'll see, right? I think the positive here is that Jacksonville's offense has really come out of the gates humming. And even in that week 1 loss, which you referenced to the Commanders, everything was available. It was just a slight overthrow here or timing being off a fraction over there. Like Jacksonville stopped themselves. But you're looking at that offense really just come alive the last 2 weeks. All told, through so far this season, Jacksonville's 2nd in schedule-adjusted passing efficiency. They've scored on 49% of possessions, most in the league. And I think this cat-mouse game here is going to be pretty fascinating because what Doug Peterson has Trevor Lawrence doing is playing on time, getting the ball out of his hands quickly because he wants him playing in rhythm a little bit. He doesn't want him to overthink. And sometimes we've seen when Trevor Lawrence overthinks, pats the ball a few times and throws it into some areas of the field that he probably shouldn't. But right now you're seeing Trevor Lawrence with the 7th quickest time to throw. We saw it last week. Lawrence was elite getting the ball out quickly and on time. He'll have to be able to do that against an Eagles defensive front that's 7th in pressure rate. But you go back to last week, and I understand the Chargers offense was banged up, but the defense had virtually all of its parts, although Bosa did leave, somewhat early in that game. But Lawrence on quick passes last week, 19 of 23 for 162 yards and a touchdown, a positive 9.4 expected points in total on those passes that left his hand in under 2.5 seconds. And by nature, Jonathan Gannon's defense allows you to complete the short stuff. They play 52% of snaps in this cover 4 and cover 6 zone. We saw in week 1, Amon-Ra St. Brown for the Lions had 12 targets playing mostly in the slot. That's going to be a space that Christian Kirk occupies. He's been fantastic. Doug Peterson has done a great job finding ways to get Christian Kirk open, and he's torched zone so far. In terms of the offense, again, thinking about this, right? Like, you just have to keep track of the weather here. Like, it's not part of the Hurricane Ian storm. It's just this system. And right now I'm looking at it, 47% chance of rain, 15 mile per hour winds at 1 p.m. kickoff. So this is how this is unfolded, where you're seeing the evolution of the market and how it can change and what weather does to totals, because this was one of the better over bets of the week. And saw a pretty sharp group come in over on Monday, and again, as this weather's come in, we've seen it crash down from 48.5 to 46 now. So just kind of keep an eye on this weather system.
Hey, always a chance Mother Nature gives us a reprieve, a window that could impact a game for a short period of time, and we could see both of these offenses on full display. I mean, you highlighted the Jacksonville offense, but clearly when you're looking at this game, Philadelphia has stolen all the headlines. Jalen Hurts putting up numbers in a half of football that most teams would be extremely excited if their teams were able to generate in full games. The offense is averaging 321 yards per game in just the first half. Payne, that's more than 8 teams are averaging for the full game. They come into this spot off a 24-8 win versus Washington as a 5.5-point road favorite, where it took very real sharp money on the underdog that was more or less dead and buried by the time we got to halftime. The Eagles, hey, look, I mean, they generated pressure defensively. You highlighted some of the challenges that Trevor Lawrence will have, but for Jalen Hurts, he has operating with an arsenal of weapons. Devontae Smith was an afterthought week 1 where A.J. Brown was the focal point. Smith has his breakout performance against the Commanders. A.J. Brown, no slouch in that department either, and he's historically torched this same Jaguars defense as a member of the Tennessee Titans, but they're also getting contributions from Dallas Goedert, and I really don't think it matters who their primary running back is. I know Miles Sanders is dinged, but Philadelphia feels like they have 37 capable backs that can work effectively in harmony with Jalen Hurts.
You're spot on. And I think ultimately, when you're looking at this side of the matchup, I understand Jacksonville's defense has shown quite well, and the 2 rookies have certainly helped this unit move forward. But think about this. The Jaguars defense has faced Carson Wentz. He's 24th out of 32 qualifying quarterbacks in EPA plus completion percentage above expectation the first 3 quarters of games. Then you get the Colts offense. They're dead last in schedule-adjusted efficiency. It doesn't feel like Matt Ryan and that offense is clicking quite yet. And then you got a 60% healthy Justin Herbert without his starting center, left tackle, right tackle, and number 1 receiver. And you have a Jacksonville defense that's stepping up in class this week. So I don't think they're going to play, or they weren't going to play, to their efficiency rating. The weather may save them. And I think the other element here is, like, Philadelphia hasn't played a murderer's row of defenses either, but the offense hasn't been pushed. They led by 3 scores in the third quarter at Detroit against both the Vikings and Commanders on a short week. Those were games in garbage time by halftime. The Eagles' offense has not been pushed. So, if you're looking at full game metrics, that's probably not the right way to assess Philadelphia's offense. In non-garbage time, the Eagles are number 1 in EPA per play, and by a pretty good margin. And I think the one thing that we're seeing unfold here, and we discussed it a little bit in the offseason, we did our May podcast on the NFL that kind of recapped the draft and what we were hearing, and Jalen Hurts wasn't looking like he made the massive leaps in accuracy. And then when we got around to doing the Philadelphia Eagles season preview in August, he was looking much better, was everything we were hearing. And right now, Jalen Hurts has the best passing grade among qualifying quarterbacks. He's 5th in EPA plus completion percentage above expectation the first 3 quarters. The accuracy is improved. It's allowing the Eagles offense to really run these spread concepts and make defenses guard every blade of grass, because he's creating this extra man advantage with his legs, so defenses have to keep the extra guy in the box. And now, because he's able to throw accurately, he's got receivers operating one-on-one in all of this extra open space. It's just been a total nightmare for defenses. And you think about this a year ago, like, no one anticipated Jalen Hurts improving this much, but we knew he was a worker. We knew that, right? He was going to work on his game. And right now, he's leading the league 8.5 yards per passing play. It's been ridiculous. And then you think about the last three offenses Jacksonville's faced. Again, it's Wentz, it's Matt Ryan, it's Justin Herbert, who couldn't run. It's three statues basically in the pocket. The interesting element here, though, is I will say this, something to think about, something to factor in. Jacksonville's defensive coordinator is Mike Caldwell. He was the linebackers coach and co-DC for Tampa last season. He helped devise the defensive game plan for the Buccaneers in the playoffs that made Jalen Hurts look like he wasn't a franchise quarterback, and everyone was able to question Hurts in the offseason because of that game plan. Let's see what Mike Caldwell comes up with this week. It looks like a far superior version of Jalen Hurts than the one we saw in the playoffs last year. The offense appears more complete. There's more weapons. It's a healthier offense for Philadelphia than what they put out in the field against Tampa. They're throwing to all parts of the field a little bit more frequently now than what they did last season, but something to at least think about there.
Can I ask a dumb follow-up question here and put on my dunce cap for the follow-up question? How much of what Caldwell was able to execute with Tampa Bay's personnel being significantly better than the Jags can you apply to something like this? The concept's obviously there, but personnel, in your opinion, do you think he's able to execute at a similar level, or just to try and do some of the same things in coverage?
Yeah, listen, when I bring things up like this, it's just to think about it.
No,
right?
That's
These are
I just
things
wanted
that
to
you
ask
need
as
to
a
be
follow-up.
thinking about defensively, right? Now, Shaquille Barrett and Walker on the same planet, probably not. Although Walker's playing quite well, and Devin Lloyd has just been instrumental in the middle of that defense, and so he's taking on the shape of a Levante David. Now at corner, I would agree they probably don't have the horses, but the game plan was simple, and it was like, Jalen Hurts is not throwing into the middle of the field. We know he's not going to throw there. Let's anticipate, and as soon as that ball snapped on throwing down, we're just going to push outside the hashes and force him to throw into tight coverages where we just have a gazillion dudes. Now that you have an A.J. Brown, and this was the reason you go out and get him, is he was fantastic running slants and in routes, and we've seen that take shape through the early part of the season, and Philadelphia is now throwing to all parts. I mean, just 6% of the Eagles' drives have ended in 3 and outs. It's the best rate in the league. This offense is just humming right now.
It's pretty incredible, and we saw that, to your point, on full display week 1. I mean, A.J. Brown operating in the slot, a receiver capable of catching a 6-yard pass, using his physicality and turning it into a massive gain, coming off of those RPO concepts that the Eagles want to try and deploy. And we've yet to see the Eagles really have to open up their playbook in the second half of games. It's what makes this Sunday's matchup against Jacksonville so fascinating for all of the ancillary storylines that'll impact what unfolds on the football field. Last but certainly not least, Sunday Night Football, assuming this game does get played in its preferred venue down there in Tampa. Thoughts to all those folks that have been impacted by Hurricane Ian, not just along the Gulf Coast, but obviously in South Florida as well. We hope you and your families are staying safe and staying well. That's most important as you go through a tough situation like this. The Kansas City Chiefs, modest 1-point road favorites, and the total on this game sits at 45, down a touch from the open at 46.5, even some 47s that were out there and widely available. You've also seen some dog money as well. We know that Hurricane has impacted the preparation of the Tampa Bay Bucs. They moved their entire operations to Miami in anticipation of the storm. Were able to bring their kids and families with them to maintain some level of normalcy. Week 3 was the first time Tom Brady and Patrick Mahomes, though, Payne, had scored 17 or fewer points in the same week. It was the 62nd time during their playing careers they had played at the same time. And when you look at these two quarterbacks, neither one of them familiar with futility. One of them will get saddled with a multiple game losing streak, depending on how the game ends on Sunday. And when you're trying to assess some recent trends, some interesting numbers to think about. The last 3 Tom Brady versus Patrick Mahomes matchups have all gone under the total. However, this would be the lowest total, anything under 49.5 that we've seen in a Brady Mahomes game game, a far cry from a total of 54 in the Super Bowl, 56 in the regular season meeting, and numbers that approach nearly 60 when Tom Brady was still under center for the New England Patriots. This would also be the 13th career start for Tom Brady as a home underdog. Well, TB12 doesn't like to catch points in his own building. 9-3 straight up in those games, 11-1 against the spread. Best cover percentage as a home underdog going all the way back to 2000. Meanwhile, the Chiefs, they've been able to win games away from home, 14-5 straight up, the last 19 on the road, but just a modest 9-10 against the spread. This is the game we all live for, seeing marquee quarterbacks go up against, in one case, an underrated defense in Kansas City, and in another, a defense playing at an extremely high level. But for fantasy players and those that root for points, they were no doubt disappointed by the 14-12 finish between Tampa and Green Bay. They may be disappointed by some of the fireworks or lack thereof we see unfold Sunday night.
This is one of the best matchups of the weekend because there's just so much variance, and that is... I just can't wait to watch. I think we all realize the Chiefs offense doesn't have that same explosive punch as years past. And you're looking at Mahomes, he's thrown the ball 15 plus yards on less than 12% of his attempts this year. He's still trying to get up to speed with his new receiving core because if you're looking right now, just 50% of Mahomes' attempts have targeted receivers. It's the lowest rate in his career. And Tampa, on the other hand, has done a really good job limiting explosives. Top 3 defense and allowing both 10-plus and 20-plus yard passes. I think we believe and perceive the Buccaneers to still have this elite defense. So far through 3 weeks, they've played a really banged-up Cowboys offense that we, saw backup quarterback come in a good amount of snaps and play on that Sunday nighter. The Saints offense, which is decimated by injury. Packers offense that plays like a snail and doesn't really have receivers. So you're looking at this. All told, the Bucs have faced the easiest schedule of passing offenses and the second easiest schedule of overall offenses. So they've played well, but this is certainly a step up in class. The Chiefs offense really remains damn good on early downs. Second best over the first 3 games. This will be, their toughest test as well because today, 27th toughest schedule of defenses faced through 3 weeks for the Chiefs offense. So there's some variance within that. And you can tell, like with some of these underlying metrics, that both of the units have some issues. You just don't know if they're going to be exploitable, And I think that's what makes this so fun and why I can't wait to watch this. I think, as we talk about variance a little bit more, these tiny things that I'm kind of identifying that I've written down and I kind of want to gauge as the sample size increases a little bit, but like the Buccaneers run defense hasn't been its usual self. The D-line hasn't been as dominant, right? They're 25th in run-stop win rate. Akeem Hicks, we know, is injured. Is Kansas City the team that's going to exploit that on the ground? You mentioned the Clyde Edwards-Helaire prop last week. Through 3 games, Kansas City's 29th in schedule-adjusted rush efficiency. Then you have multiple Buccaneers defenders talking shit this week. I don't know if that's the best recipe, but they're like, hey, this is going to be just like the Super Bowl. The Chiefs' offensive line isn't any good in protection. We're going to eat them alive again. Maybe the Buccaneers do that, but right now they're generating pressure at the second lowest rate the first 3 quarters. So, my mind in the overarching metrics indicate Chiefs offense is solid, but they lack a little punch. Chiefs offense playing a touch slower. Buccaneers defense is still good despite playing weak offenses, but there's some underlying things from both these units that we absolutely have to keep monitoring because I think we could see some slippage from these 2 groups at some point. I don't know if it'll unfold here on Sunday night, but certainly some things that aren't great.
Well, if that's not great, you know what definitely hasn't been? The Tampa Bay Buccaneers offense so far to date. They're one of 2 teams in the National Football League without a first-half touchdown. They'll join the New York Giants with said distinction. 3rd straight week, they scored just 1 touchdown. They, of course, played without, their top 3 wide receivers, starting 3rd-string left tackle. So the offense should look a little bit more dynamic when you add number 1 playmaker Mike Evans back into the fold. But there's no doubt there are some continuity concerns for Tampa offensively. There's been just 13 snaps where Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and Julio Jones have been on the field together. And when you look at Tom Brady, he may have a revamped O-line, but he still has the lowest pressure rate, under 20%, and the quickest time to throw, 2.37 seconds in the league. He also has the 8th longest air yards per attempt this season, despite the quick release. Tampa Bay's offense against the Chiefs' defense, how do we see this unfolding?
Yeah, this is, again, some variance to me. And then you factor in some of the midweek turmoil you mentioned at the top with Tampa having to relocate its practices to Miami. Now, we have seen a massive buy in the Buccaneers +3. It's why it's down as low as pick. And if you kind of know the players in this market and where that bet seemed to have originated, you could deduce that is quite sharp and someone you don't want to be going against. Now, you're certainly buying low on the Buccaneers offense. And when you're taking the Buccaneers +3, yes, you're number grabbing, but you're also putting in some manual projections for this Buccaneers offense that would indicate some improvement, right? Better health for Brady, who is dealing with a little bit of a finger issue. The O-line and the receiver group should be a touch healthier, and then you have the return of Mike Evans from suspension, and we discussed last week what Brady's splits look like with Mike Evans on and off the field. Substantially better, huge upgrade, obviously. So you're expecting those factors to increase pass rates and lead to more efficiency, because if you look at Tampa and you're gauging them just through the first 3 weeks, the Buccaneers are 22nd in early down EPA the first 3 quarters. And I think, the assumption from those that like the Buccaneers is with the offensive increase, like that could be a shock to the Chiefs' defensive system a little bit. Now, I know Kansas City's playing quite well defensively. Spags, we have a ton of respect for with some of his schemes and his ideas and how creative he is sending blitzes. They're 9th right now in schedule-adjusted defensive efficiency, but it's come against the 4th easiest schedule of offenses. So if you are projecting Tampa to increase a bunch, maybe that's how you're getting to that side. Interestingly, though, the Chiefs' defense has done really well stopping the run, 6th best in the league. Fournette hasn't really had the help up front from the O-line. You go against the Saints and the Packers recently, and the Saints' run defense is very good. The Packers clearly sold out because the Buccaneers didn't have their necessary receiving options, so it helped the Packers defense stop that run. But right now, the last 2 weeks, Fournette 0.5 yards before first contact. I thought the Chiefs did a great job stopping Jonathan Taylor last week in the Colts run game. They checked in at 25th in EPA per rush last week, the Colts did. The other thing that I think you have to think about here is going back to Spags a little bit and his usage of blitzes. Very strategic with them. He's obviously won some battles over the years against Brady, one particularly in the Super Bowl. The Chiefs are number 2 in pressure rate. And because of the O-line issues, you hit this perfectly. Brady's treating the ball like a hot potato right now. Quickest time to throw in the NFL. We want to monitor that injury report. Donovan Smith did get in a limited on Wednesday. He got in some limited work last week. The elbow injury, I keep being told, is a pain threshold tolerance kind of thing. It's not necessarily, going to get worse. It's just if he can manage it throughout the game, that would be a huge get back. But if he doesn't return, that is a factor for this Kansas City defense that I think allows them to have a little bit more success than perception when you think Chiefs defense, Tom Brady, my God, how are they going to survive? Because again, if Donovan Smith doesn't go, you're on your 3rd string left tackle. You're already on your backup rookie left guard. You're already on your backup center. And some of those exotic blitzes that Spags sends that you don't quite know where they're coming from can be tough to handle. And then again, like getting pressure. We talked about this defensive end group, and Mike Dana was out last week, but Dunlap filled in pretty admirably. There's a couple guys there that can get pressure. So just keep an eye on the injury report. I saw Godwin got a limited on Wednesday. So there's just a lot of moving parts. And that's, I think, what stinks, right? When you think about this game on the schedule, and then like TV networks are bidding out their ass for the rights to this game. There's just so many moving parts here again with injuries and the location of the game, and I think that's probably worth mentioning here as well, Todd, before I quickly pass the baton back to you. It's like you look at some of the rules within certain sports books, the overwhelming majority of books will not grade a bet after a venue change. It's a refund, no harm, no foul. However, one popular book came out, put it on social media. They state that a bet is action if the game is played in the same schedule spot and the home team remains designated as such. So,
which is insane to me, by the way.
It's absolutely nuts. So knowing when, where, and how to bet is we say this all the time, is as important as like who you're betting, right? Like, I mean, just early on in the week, some very sharp under money came in because the numbers indicated as such, because there was a thinking that the weather could impact this game. And if there was a venue change, no biggie, bets voided. Once we got down to 43.5, bettors are saying, we can't possibly have a Mahomes Brady total this low. You referenced the lowest one being like 49.5. And then you have pros saying, if I place this bet at this specific shop at 43.5, 44, and suddenly the game's played in a dome on a fast track in Minnesota, and my bet isn't going to be voided, I have to take that strategic shot. And so here we sit at 45.
Yeah, it's wild to me when you brought that to my attention, and I actually shared one of the more prominent books out here and nationally about how they handle it. And clearly in black and white in their house rules, it says if a venue is changed, a bet is null and void. So as always, try and take advantage of what some of the shops will offer you. Use that to your best advantage, but there's no excuse for a sports bettor, even if you're a $10 player or you're a dime bettor, to not know exactly how those things are going to be treated and to place your bets accordingly. You can follow Payne on Twitter at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Furman. Follow me there as well. Again, most importantly, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And Payne, it's the time of the show where we wrap things up as far as the 5 deep dives that we've provided for you and identify where we think there's a little bit of wiggle room in some of the numbers that may be available in the betting market.
So I know you and I have gone back and forth all morning trying to identify that specific best bet. There's just been so much movement in the market. There's a bunch of weather. There's a bunch of moving parts. It's very difficult. So I hate to make everyone wait, but let's go to Monday Night Football. I would encourage you going as soon as you hear this, even with the public likely going the opposite way. But let's go with the Rams 49ers first half under 21, which is the widely available number. And you're just thinking about this a little bit, right? The Rams defense is going down in class with the offense they're facing. The Rams offense not nearly as threatening thus far, with some O-line issues, still searching for that ancillary weapon to complement Cooper Kupp. 49ers defense is clearly firing on all cylinders. Offensively, the 49ers seem to be missing Mike McDaniel. I mean, 50% of drives against, that San Francisco's had have ended without a first down or touchdown. You have your all-world left tackle, Trent Williams, dealing with a high ankle sprain, unlikely to go. You're looking at pace, right? 49ers, 29th in first half pace. The Rams are just average. So you have all of these components here that lend themselves to an under. The group that went under full game, quite respected in the totals market. Still some value here going first half as well on the under 21.
It's all about trying to reinvent the wheel and take what the market gives you as we get later in the week. We see more and more movement on Mondays, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays than we ever have before in the National Football League. So first half under it is Monday Night Football. Get out early. Get that ticket in your pocket. The number is only poised to go one direction. All right, my friend, we can officially wrap up the week. The Monday podcast in the books, college football. If you haven't already listened to that, go back and listen to it. And of course, the National Football League. Any other parting shots, things that you haven't had a chance to get into our 3 shows already this week?
Bucks money continuing to pile in at +1. Now pick.
Yeah, apparently so. So if you listen to this podcast and you had the Bucks circled as a potential teaser leg, you might want to get out ahead of it. For Payne Insider, I'm Todd Furman. Best of luck with all of your NFL Week 4 investments. And come Monday night with a first half under ticket in hand, we'll see you at the window.
Thanks for listening to Bet the Board. You can catch Todd and Payne every Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday during football season, breaking down the biggest NFL and college football games. And to make sure you don't miss any free best bets, subscribe to Bet the Board on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.